Happy New Year and welcome to More Than Sunday, the podcast that aims to help you on your journey of discipleship, not just on Sundays, but on every other day of the week as well. You're listening to episode 7 with me, Eve Powers, and Hannah Malcolm.
Hello, we're into the second half of our year of discipleship already. Thank you for sticking with us so far.
We hope you've all had a wonderful Christmas season. Of course, it's not over yet if you're listening to this before the 12th night. We'd love to hear where your discipleship journey is taking you, be it over this Christmas period, over the last 6 months, or perhaps what you're hoping for as we head into 2020.
We want this podcast to be a living reflection of faith and discipleship in our diocese, so please do share your experiences with us and your fellow disciples as we continue our journey.
You can get in touch with us in lots of different ways. You can email us at morethansunday@manchester.anglican.org, or tweet using the hashtag MoreThanSunday, or join our Facebook discipleship group. Just search More Than Sunday on Facebook. Our theme this month is justice.
What does it look like to pursue justice as a disciple?
So, here to discuss justice with us are two fantastic guests. Development Officer for Greater Together Manchester, Lily Axworthy, and Community Development Worker and Manchester City Councillor, who miraculously also finds time to study for a contextual theology degree, Tracy Rawlins. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining us. Can you tell us what being a disciple means to you? Lily, can we start with you?
You always have to start with me. So discipleship to me, I think, is very much about kind of incarnational theology. It's very much about being the gospel and being the change you want to see in the world. So Jesus, throughout the gospel, is shown to care deeply about social justice. He's overtly on the side of the poor. He reaches out to the alienated, the excluded, and the mistreated. So I think justice is very much at the heart of the gospel story, and so it's very much what we are called to do as Christians, and you see it throughout the writings that relate to the early church as well, in terms of how social justice is very much a part and parcel of what it means to be a Christian at that time, and even in terms of a form of liturgy as well.
So, scary theology buzzword alert. Lily kicked us off with a great one, incarnational theology. So, can you tell us what incarnational means, Lily?
To me, incarnational basically means it's about what we do and who we are as people, as opposed to necessarily what we say.
Would it be like living out
Yeah.
your faith and your beliefs?
Yeah, and Hannah can probably explain it better than me because she's got about 62 theology degrees.
I mean, she is the clever one in our little power too.
Well, I mean, if we're putting it in a Christian sense, incarnation refers to Jesus coming as a human, being in flesh, and so I guess it's about what it means to, as you say, live out what we believe in our bodies. So it's something that we live.
It's a much more eloquent way of putting it, thank you.
Oh, she's good, isn't she? I'll tell you what, that's why I do the intros. So, Tracy, can you tell us, what does being a disciple mean to you?
Oh, yes, and I haven't got as many big words to use, I'm afraid. I've not done that module yet in my degree. It's only the second year about just sort of starting, so there you go, I've got some catching up to do. But I think, for me, it's about living with that form of discipline, i.e. discipleship, I guess, that being like Jesus and how Jesus is in the Gospels is. So it is about essentially treating other people as we want to be treated ourselves, and that's the simplest way of describing it, I guess. So without being really corporate and Church of England, one of the things I really love are the 5 marks of mission, because I actually think that they describe quite nicely what it is to be a disciple. So tend, teach, tell, treasure and transform, if I get them all right, as the 5 T's. So that's kind of the 5 bullet points, I guess, that I would use in my personal sort of faith journey and in terms of my community development work. I think it's all of those things. And it changes because it is a journey. So sometimes we go the wrong way and don't do it quite well enough. So we have to come back and start again.
So, scary Church of England-y buzzword alert. We've hit the 5 marks of mission. Just very quickly, for our listeners, will you tell us what they are with more than one word?
Tell everybody about the good news, so the gospel, etc. Teach people. So I see that, for example, one of the other things that I did till quite recently has been part of our Sunday school team and coordinating that kind of work. And then I also think that through my everyday work as a community worker, I'm teaching people, I hope, all the time about various things. Treasure, that's about looking after creation and the world around us and the resources that God gave us. So if you think about other things, another buzzword that I'm not going to describe, eco-church and things like that, and how we're looking at the environment and how we need to recycle, reuse more, things like that. Transform, have I done that one yet? That's so for me, that's about social justice and challenging kind of some of the inequalities in the world. Tending is about caring for each other and nurturing.
I think that's it. That was
Mission
5.
There you
Yeah,
go.
brilliant.
I have been paying attention with my mission action planning, you see.
I wasn't intending for this to turn into like a theology quiz, but
It feels like it,
if
doesn't
anyone
it?
listening wants to send in other ridiculous theology questions to ask random guests, let us know and we'll make it a frightening segment that we do in future.
Yeah,
I will
terrifying
never
theology. It's the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, we'll never be back, will we?
So both of you have actually touched right off the bat in talking about what it means for you to be a disciple. You've both touched on this justice thing as part of what you've mentioned. If you're willing to share, it'd be great to hear a little bit of your personal stories of why justice has become such a concern for you. Maybe how you ended up doing the work you do now, what led you to that. It might be something different. We'll start with you, Tracy.
Okay. I'm a disabled person, so I guess growing up, I've kind of faced lots of barriers and things. And over time, I've realised that those aren't my issues, they're the world and society around us. And so for me, that's kind of encouraged my kind of want to almost fight for justice and sort of say, hang on a minute, this isn't right, you need to do this, we need to do these things differently. And I'm just going to say, just in case he barks and has anything to say at any moment, I have got my assistant dog with me who's been very quiet at the moment but may comment at some point. So there we are, just so people know what that might be if he chooses to chip in. But also, my dad was a politician when I was growing up, so I think I kind of have this thing in my head thinking about nature versus nurture, because I never thought actually that I would be particularly politically active, but I didn't realise growing up that not everybody had those experiences, because I just grew up knowing that it was important to listen to the news and know what was going on, and that if you wanted to make a difference, you had to be able to go and ask the right questions and be brave enough to say, I think this and it should be different. I never realised until I left home in Birmingham and moved to Manchester that that wasn't the norm, because that's all I've ever known. So I guess I've always had a sense of kind of justice and looking to see what alternatives are.
Right.
And really, I got involved in community development just purely by accident as a single mum with some young children. I went to toddler group, started to wash up, then make toast. And before I knew it, I was volunteering. How did that happen? And then I was saying to people, well, you don't need to put up with that. You need to go and see the council and tell them this and go to that forum because that's what I'm used to doing. And then somebody said to me, you know, you can get paid to do community development, which is essentially what you're doing. And I was like, get lost. Who would pay you to do stuff like that? And lo and behold, they do. So that's kind of how I got into doing what I do. And also, I've been very, very lucky that I've only ever done jobs that I've really wanted to do. So I can't imagine what it's like to go to work just to earn money. I've always been able to go to work, thankfully, and feel that I've done a good job or made a difference. And when that stops, I find a new job. So there you go.
I think it's like a fascinating thing that you've just pointed out, that for you, a lot of what trying to do justice means is helping other people get empowered to go and make things right in their own lives, in their own communities. It's not stepping in and doing it for people. It's giving them the tools to go and make a difference.
Absolutely. And you know, I wouldn't be doing my job right if I'm not doing it that way, because that's what's empowered me and enabled me to become the person that I am, is by people around me kind of helping me to connect the dots. The most infuriating thing is when somebody says, I'll do it for you, or you can't do that. We can all get where we want to be if we're given the right support. And, you know, I think being a Christian is about walking alongside people and with people. It's not about, I'll do it for you. It's not about that at all.
Lily, let's get personal. Tell us a little bit about your discipleship journey, or what's led you to this point where the work that you do is, you could say, justice oriented. And you've talked about social justice quite a bit already.
It's a funny one, really, because it's a bit similar to Tracy, really, in the sense that I sort of fell into it. I'd always been very switched on to what was going on around me, but I grew up in a kind of bubble of not necessarily seeing deprivation and vulnerability on my doorstep. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but I think that I was very aware that what I was experiencing wasn't necessarily what everyone else was experiencing, and I'm very grateful for the fact that I grew up in a position of privilege, really. But I think that there's a great need now to look at what it is that are the systems that are holding people back. So it's kind of taking that idea of, actually, as Christians, we're really good at putting sticking plasters on things. We're really good at going, okay, you've got an immediate need, whether that's hunger or clothing or housing or whatever it is. We can fix that immediately. So we can give you food, we can give you clothes, we can give you somewhere to sleep. What we're not as good at is understanding that really we're called to use our privilege and our positions of power and our knowledge and our resources and our skills to not only help people, but also to change the system that puts them in that position in the first place. I ended up in the role that I'm in with Greater Together Manchester about 4 years ago. And it was just completely by chance that I happened to meet someone who was involved in the kind of process of setting this charity up, with no real framework as to what necessarily it was going to be, other than it had something to do with trying to help the church get involved in stuff to do with poverty. Poverty's always been at the centre of what our focus has been, but we've done both. Great Together Manchester has done kind of both. It's kind of done the sticking plaster stuff, which is really important, and we do a lot of work around night shelters and homelessness, and that work is amazing. We have like 400 volunteers who support us with that, and it kind of put us on the map as an organisation, and it's very much needed. But there's another level to what we do, which is we can use that to give us an in terms of changing the system and using the connections we get through offering kind of frontline services to actually get in the room with the people who have the ability to make changes. And we've seen that through Andy Burnham's A Bed Every Night programme, which launched last winter and will be continuing this winter and hopefully beyond. We were running light shelters, but Andy Burnham kind of came to realise that there was not enough provision.
Right.
So he's very much trying to get the provision of emergency accommodation into the mainstream. And I think without churches and charities standing up and saying this is something we need to do because it's going to literally save lives, and this is something really that should be mainstream in our society, we shouldn't have anyone sleeping on the streets. I think without those charities and those churches standing up and saying that, I don't necessarily think we'd be where we are now. So, I mean, we can't take credit for it all, because there's a lot of people who have been involved in this process. But I think we are where we are because people have stood up and done their bit. And so it is having a kind of wider system impact.
Both of you have talked a little bit about seeing that things should be different as a starting point for the kind of work you do, or noticing that things need to change. How does your faith, or does your faith, inform that vision for difference that you might be referring to? So you have this picture in your head of what you want things to be like. Is that informed by your faith? Where does that vision come from?
I think yes and no. It's one of those questions where I don't think I've ever really properly sat down and thought about it, because it's always been a thing where I've kind of said, yes, the world needs to be more just. But what that actually, I'm not Karl Marx, so what that actually looks like, I've not kind of sat down and written a manifesto about it. I don't have the time.
You've still got time. Oh, you'll find time.
You'll find time to write a manifesto. But in terms of, I think, underpinning a lot of what is in the Bible as a whole, particularly the New Testament, is those things about equality and justice and freedom of choice and freedom of expression, and a need to allow people to flourish in terms of their humanity. And I think there is a distinct lack within our society of opportunities for people who aren't born into privilege, who aren't born into kind of white middle class or even upper middle class or families. I think there are a lot of systematic issues around whether people can achieve their potential or not, and there's a lot of barriers. And it's asking the question, I guess, how do we create a society where there are fewer barriers for people to be able to achieve what they want to achieve? And how do we ensure that everyone is motivated in order to do that? Because I think one of the biggest issues we have around poverty in the UK is that it's often multi-generational. There can be a real lack of feeling like there's even a chance of a light at the end of the tunnel, and that you can work yourself into the ground and it makes very little difference. I mean, in the UK, 59% of children who live in poverty live in a household that's working. So work isn't necessarily the way out of poverty. So what is it that allows someone to get to the point where they're able to make choices? Because, I mean, living in poverty is about not having choices. It's about everything and very much being out of your control. There's a lot of chaos involved in that. And the world that I would like to see, I think is informed by faith, but it's very much a case of it being about removing barriers for people in order to see them flourish.
Tracy?
I guess for me, my faith absolutely does influence that, but it's something that I've only come to realise in the last 18 months to 2 years as I've matured as a Christian, I guess, because I've always had knowledge and some relationship with God. So, you know, like when some people have like a really big new experience of becoming a Christian and things like that, I've never had that. It's kind of like, when did that happen for me? I'm not quite sure. Equally, I think I feel really fortunate for that. And I think what my faith gives me in the work that I do, in the life that I live, in this society that we're in at the moment, is hope.
Right.
It's hope because I know there's better. I know it can be better. And I think you see that when you read through the New Testament, you read through what Jesus did, and it gives me hope in my own frailty, because Jesus always used the least people, the people that were a bit broken, the people that didn't have anything. Those were the people that Jesus chose to use. And I kind of think, right, so how are you using me then? But I'm a bit broken. My legs don't work. My eyes don't work very well. I'm becoming re-educated later in life. I'm very much a believer in that we learn by doing. And so it's been a big, almost a leap of faith, for want of a better phrase, for me to actually go into a formal educational setting and sit down and do a degree. It's been a really hard decision because I've always had a bit of like, I'm not worth it. What have I got to say that anyone's interested in listening to? We'll find out when we get the numbers for the podcast, won't we? But, you know, that not quite believing in yourself. And I think that maybe comes from some of that working class background, from knowing what it is to not have stuff, to be desperate to give your kids the best, but no, you've got to wait till the next benefit check or whenever it is because you just got to wait. They can't have everything immediately. And making those sacrifices on a daily basis really can impact your kind of self-esteem and stuff. And so I've had really good people around me and a church family that have built me up over a very, very long time, that I actually believe it now. And I think one of the ways that we do development work, whether you're in a paid role like mine or whether you're volunteering or just part of something, a group, anything, your neighbours, is that you share your stories because it becomes reachable for everyone. And so if you think you have no faith, I'm not always convinced that people have no faith. I think we just need to find it somewhere. But it's like you can kind of magnify it, and it's like, oh, she's had depression. She's not wanted to do it. She's got 30% on a paper because people go, you're amazing, you do loads of stuff, but we only present the good stuff. So it's about being able to be vulnerable in my own life journey, sharing truthfully and honestly your stories and the hiccups, because just because you've got faith and you've got you're on a Christian pathway does not mean that life is easy. It does not mean that. But I think from somebody outwards looking inwards might think you've got everything, and it's being able to hold your hands up sometimes and go, I haven't done that very well. I didn't do that very well. I wish I had more, because that's human nature. But we try and find a balance. So I think it does, and I think it is about that hope and knowing that there is something better to aspire to.
I wonder if quite a large part of that is the ways that, as Lily has mentioned, we have had an emphasis on this distinction between service and transforming society, right? So as Lily says, we are really, really good at helping people meet their immediate needs and making sure that they've got support for that. So that's something that is embedded in the Christian tradition and has been for centuries. This idea that Christians should also be interested in transforming the ways that systems currently work is maybe something we don't tend to think about quite so much, partly because we live quite comfortably as Christians in the UK. And I think unless you're at the you're at the forefront of experiencing injustice, it can be difficult to make that link. But it's I always think that there's something quite funny about, we might debate all sorts of things about which bits of the Bible to take literally, but I've never heard anyone say that the bit of the Bible they really take literally is Jesus saying you should give up everything you have, sell it and give it to the poor and come follow me. No one's having that debate, are they, about whether that's a literal text or not? So I wonder if part of it is the ways that we just want to maintain the comfort that we have, and the church in the UK is a relatively comfortable place. So it might be an ongoing practice of having to learn those things almost in retrospect, going beyond the service to the system transformation.
I think it's really interesting when we look at who it is who's been vulnerable and who's been at the kind of the sharp end. But I think there's an acknowledgement that we're all broken in some way, shape or form, and that everyone has a kind of brokenness about them. And that if we can acknowledge that, we can kind of move past it and actually acknowledge that the world itself is a bit broken. I read somewhere a really interesting article about this in terms of asking people, telling people that really we should pursue social justice in a way that can create a personal cost for ourselves and that can make us unpopular. And I mean, it happens all the time. I'll stand up in front of a group of people and say, you should be doing more to help the poor. And they might have a different opinion. There's a lot of rhetoric out there about the undeserving and the deserving poor, and how basically it's up to poor people, and I hate using that phrase, but it's up to poor people to pull their socks up and get out of the situation they're in. But the problem is that the system is set up to benefit the people who are at the top. So if the lower down you are, the harder it is to climb that ladder, essentially. And so, yeah, it becomes very, very difficult for people to be able to make that change. And actually, is it about Christians putting themselves out there and saying, I want to use the power that I have to change the system? Could you imagine if every single person who goes to church within the Church of England on a Sunday suddenly decided to use the power that they have, whether that's in their school, whether that's in their church, whether that's in Parliament, whether that's in wherever it is that they are, because there are a lot of those people in our churches. If every single one of them said, you know what, I'm going to use the power that I have individually to change the system for the better, I think something dramatic could happen. But I think people do feel really comfortable. But just because you talk out in favour of someone doesn't necessarily mean that it's not necessarily to your own economical detriment either. I think we can create a fairer society that doesn't mean necessarily that the average person in the pew will have less. I think there's plenty to go round. It's just a case of how do you kind of split the pie, essentially.
I think our reliance on the sticking plaster sort of approach, which we've covered, is probably also because people really maybe don't feel empowered that they can make a difference. And I think a lot of us go, what can I actually do? And, you know, you guys are out there doing that and making a positive difference in your communities. And you meet lots of people who are also doing that, which is really wonderful. I wondered if you had any experiences in Manchester, projects that are going on that are actually making positive changes that you've experienced.
So one that comes to mind immediately is one that we support but that we've had nothing to do with other than provide a bit of space, and that's a uniform swap. So a couple of years ago, I can mention a name because I know she won't mind, Claire became aware that she'd got 3 kids of her own, and, you know, you get to kind of like mid-August and they all need new trousers, new skirts, new blazers, new jumpers, and she was like, but they've not got anywhere out of the stuff they had last term and I've got to change it and get new stuff. And she started talking to her neighbours and created this space to kind of do a uniform swap. So she just asked out on Facebook, would anybody up for swapping bits of uniform? Everyone's like, yeah, I've got loads. And we just offered her some space where she could bring stuff and people could bring stuff and swap it, etc., etc. And that project has grown, and all we did was provide a bit of space for her to lay out some clothes on the pews, and we've got this really poignant photograph of school ties hanging over the altar rail, and it just, even when I think about it now, it just moves me because it was just so simple and yet moving in a kind of like we're doing this with each other, and creating space for other people. So, and that's grown and grown and grown. And it's just, and I know because of the families that use our breakfast club and say, is uniform swap on this week? Yes, it is. Bring your stuff, or don't bring any stuff if you haven't got anything. And what she'll sometimes say is, if you've got no uniform to swap, that's fine. If you can bring 1 tin of beans or something for the food bank, that is a good enough, a good enough swap, really.
What an amazing project.
From nothing, just from a local need. And that's what's important. It's not about me thinking, this is what I need to do to change Wythenshawe or Manchester or the world. It's not that. I haven't got all the answers because I don't know all of the issues. But just by listening and saying to someone, well, if you could do anything to change it, how would you change it? We can start to encourage those people to make their own changes so it doesn't rely on me. I'm not going to win the lottery because I don't buy a ticket. But, if I get run over by a bus tomorrow or whatever, stuff will still happen. It shouldn't stop because of me. And that's how you're doing a good job, when things will continue. And that's really important to me, that it's not about whether I'm in or out that day, that things will grow and continue. So that's really important. But the simplest things I find is the stuff that works the best.
I think it's really interesting because we have a project called Places of Welcome, which was started in Birmingham, but basically is about bringing people together to give them the opportunity to do exactly that. And I know that Tracy runs a number of Places of Welcome at a number of different churches in Wythenshawe. And it brings people together to try and build community in a way that allows people that wouldn't necessarily exist in the same space to just literally meet each other and have a chat. And it's such a simple concept, but actually it can make a radical difference. And just that bringing people together to allow them to share recipes and shopping tips and all the rest of it is really powerful in and of itself. And lots of things spin off Places of Welcome as well, because we always say it shouldn't get taken over by one particular interest or group or whatever. So if suddenly there's a load of people coming to your Place of Welcome that want to knit or who are interested in, I don't know, historical reenactment or something, that Place
Please
of Welcome...
tell me one of those exists.
I don't think it does, unfortunately.
Someone start
it
one.
probably does somewhere. We've got 350 across England, so there probably is one somewhere. But yeah, it shouldn't become a kind of special interest group. It stays as that kind of neutral space of sharing ideas and interests and skills. But it's also very much about saying, what is it that people have to contribute to their community? And it's about saying everyone has value. And I think that's something we've very much lost in not just in the UK, in the world, is to understand that actually people have value, people have skills, irrespective of how damaged and broken they are. Everyone has something to contribute. And I think that in and of itself is a Christian principle, really, is understanding that we're all made in the image of God. Therefore, we all have an inherent value to ourselves. And so everyone has something to contribute to their community. And it's about helping people either discover what that is or just give them the opportunity to do that. And I think the archbishops of Canterbury and York called for the church to adapt a radical inclusion. Radical inclusion isn't something that is done to people. It needs to be creating an atmosphere where people feel inherently welcome and there is a sense of belonging, as opposed to you can come in and sit in the corner. Actually, this is a place that is for you and of you.
You're not a project, you're a participant. That transition of like people being part of a community rather than a thing to tick off a list.
Yeah, you're not a service user.
They feel part of us now, which isn't about coming on a Sunday, but it is about talking to us about what our church buildings do and what we do as a church. And, you know, it's really terrible that you can't get all the money to fix your heating. Let's have a raffle. Well, if you want to do that, that would be lovely. But it gives them a connection, which, who knows, over time, you pray and you hope and you talk to them, might encourage them in, be it through the sort of traditional ways of Christingle or whichever they feel less afraid of at that time. But that's why it's a journey, isn't it? Because you've got to stick with people. And I think that's how what we do works, is because we're with people for a long time. We're not here today, gone tomorrow.
So there you go, everybody. Radical inclusion. Can we all try and do a bit more of that this month? Hannah, what else are we suggesting people have a crack at this month?
So some of this might come off the back of some of the discussion that you've heard. As you'll know, this is the time of year where we still have the night shelter project ongoing. They're always looking for more volunteers. So maybe this is a month where you think, you know what, I really want to get involved in that. So maybe one thing you could think about this month is signing up to do a night shelter shift. And there'll be more details about that in the More Than Sunday email. Of where to get in contact if that's something that you're interested in. We've talked a little bit about some of the ongoing works that churches do. And perhaps that's something that you want to take a further step towards doing more of. So you might be someone that already donates occasionally to your local food bank. Perhaps you could take the next step, whether that is donating more regularly. Maybe you could volunteer at your food bank. Maybe you could even write to your local councillor or MP to express your concern about the number of people having to use that food bank. So it's thinking a little bit about how we can make the transitions from serving people in our local communities and being mindful of our neighbours to what are the ways that I can help to transform the community where I live to make it a more just place. And of course, we're always wanting to hear your suggestions. So there are, I'm sure, lots and lots of different ways that we could be pursuing social justice that we haven't touched on in this episode. And we'd really love to hear from you about what you're up to and also particular issues that you'd like to raise and raise awareness of this month.
Of course, you can do that by just emailing us at morethansunday@manchester.anglican.org. Or you can tweet about what you and your church and your friends, what is it that you're getting up to? How are you addressing social injustices where you live? Use the hashtag MoreThanSunday. You could even tag in Greater Together Manchester in those tweets as well. Maybe follow them and see what they get up to. You're very active on there, aren't you, Lil?
We try.
C of E Withenshaw also.
C of E Withenshaw are fab on Twitter, yeah.
Much better than us.
Well, we're all doing our best, so that's the main thing, isn't it? Thank you for listening to More Than Sunday. We'll be back next month when our theme will be generations.